Yes, we're ready to go? I am. Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to this. I don't know how many sessions we already had in our pavilion on buildings, but I'm pretty happy to present today our session on building a net zero nature positive and nature positive with a focus on whole life cycle approaches and circularity as the key drivers for decarbonization. We've already had a few events on that topic, but we continue talking about it because it's so important. I mean, as you all know from also a number of previous discussions we've had here and a number of other panels that I've participated in, building materials are set to dominate emissions in the coming years, and this is definitely even more the case in some of the regions where a lot of the buildings need to be constructed, like Africa. So urgent action is required now to decarbonize the building materials and implement a whole life cycle approach to decarbonizing building and construction sector. Embodied carbon is one of the key areas that we need to look at, but we should always look at linking embodied and operational together. We should not consider only one and not consider them separately, especially when we talk about the building, and that's why we are talking about whole life carbon approaches. So this, in September actually, we issued a report from the GlobalABC on building materials and the climate and constructing a new future, and that report actually was supported and I would say even commissioned by the Ministry of Economy and Climate of Germany. And that report, our intention was actually to really show a little bit globally what is happening with materials and provide some of the solutions going forward. We've put forward in that report 3 major strategies that we think that need to be implemented together. On the one end, there's the whole strategy on building more circularity that we call the avoid strategy, then looking specifically into how can we shift to, I would say, increase the number of materials that we have instead of only having some dominating materials that are in the building and construction sector. And then, of course, we need to work on the dominating materials that we have today to decarbonize them. So today, we have actually 3 sections in our event. So the first one will focus more on the global efforts to develop methodologies that actually look at nature positive and circularity and whole life cycle approaches. The second part will highlight some country cases, and there we are looking specifically at some work that we've been doing in UNEP with the International Resource Panel, because the International Resource Panel issued a report in 2018, I believe, which was called Resource Efficiency and Climate Change, and where they said that if we work on material efficiency strategies, can actually reduce emissions 70 to 80%, depending, of course, on the country. So it's a very important element to work on. And then they actually started looking at what does it mean in some countries, and they have started trying to apply what are material efficiencies in 3 countries, and there we will talk about Indonesia, Bangladesh, and Argentina. But we also have some work that has been done in the UK, looking at how material efficiency and net zero standards policies are being adopted and operationalized at the country level. So that's where we will talk more about the countries. And the third part will be more focusing on upscaling and talking about the global networks and the power of global networks to actually continue the important sharing of information and working together actually to take this agenda forward. So I'll talk specifically, highlight the work that we are doing under the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction, where we established a materials hub where we specifically focus on these specific areas. So now I would like to invite, and I'm sorry because actually we had a last minute change. We had actually Dr. Vera Rodenhoff that was going to join us, the Deputy Director General for International and Climate Action and International Energy Transition of the German Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action. But I'm pleased to invite Dr. Lust Morgenstern, who is actually the head of the Division on General Issues of International Cooperation, Implementation Initiatives, and Sub-Department of the International Climate Action and Energy Transition. So, Dr. Lust, over to you.
So, thank you very much. I'm really happy to be here. As you can see, I'm not Vera, but thank you also for introducing me. As you said, we have also contributed financially to this important study. And as you all know, I don't have to say it here, building plays an essential role for climate mitigation. The interesting thing is that we have achieved progress, much progress already in addressing the operational carbon, for instance, through energy efficiency. But nevertheless, the emissions from building materials have so far not paid the same attention, despite their importance. As probably the study will show and you will introduce, building materials, 9% of global CO2 emissions can be attributed to building materials. So it's really important to address these emissions as well. And therefore, we think it's really it's very essential to position the topic and the solutions that are there in the center of discussions. 3 examples. First one, implementation of whole life cycle approaches in order to plan and design better to minimize emissions right from the beginning. Second example, measures to decarbonize building material industries like cement and steel. And third example, the promotion of circularity of materials and development of sustainable sourced low-carbon alternatives. We as Germany, we are engaged in these fields and we try to address these topics in different fora and really try to position it and push these agendas. Also here two examples. One is the breakthrough agenda. Germany is signatory of the buildings, of the cement and of the steel breakthrough. And they all have directly or indirectly the goal of establishing low carbon materials. Second example is the Climate Club. Flagship initiative by the German government that focuses on international cooperation for the decarbonization of the hard-to-abate industries that are key for the building and construction sector. And in the Climate Club that had its full launch here at the COP on the 1st of December with our Chancellor, Scholz, and many other head of states and governments, we really want to elevate this topic to the highest level and discuss and move further the common standards for green products and making attempts to harmonize these standards, to enhance interoperability of these standards so that enterprises don't have to deal with 30 or 40 standards for one product when they want to import it or export it to different jurisdictions, but really to have a reliable set of standards or harmonized standards that they can deal with, so that we can actually move to these green products and make the decarbonized products the default business case in all the industries. So I'm happy that we are not only engaging vocally in these fora, but we are also providing funds in order to support this work. And also here I brought 2 examples. One is our new thematic call under the International Climate Initiative, the ICI, that is our main initiative in order to fund projects around the world. And in this thematic call that was launched here at the COP, we have one window for our projects to address embodied carbon. It's for bilateral projects, and it can be funded with a sum of up to 20 million euros. And another example, this is also why we are here, is the funding of the flagship report, Building Materials and the Climate, Constructing a New Future, whose results will now be presented. And we really believe it's an important scientific work to guide policymakers in how to reduce embodied carbon. So we are really eager to work with you, with everyone, and explore more cooperation opportunities during this event and also afterwards. Thank you very much, and I'm really delighted to be here with you. Thanks.
Thank you, Lutz. definitely great to see the engagement of Germany in the building and construction sector. I mean, we have a close cooperation already for quite a number of years under the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. I'm very pleased now also that, with the buildings breakthrough, we're bringing this to the next level, I would say, and also with our forum that will be taking place in March. Now, I think we have someone online for us because we have Professor Edgar Erdwisch, and Professor Edgar Erdwisch actually is closely engaged into the International Resource Panel and has actually been working on those material efficiency strategy work that we've been doing, and he will present some of the. I know there's actually currently happening an IRP event, so an International Resource Panel event at the same time as our event here, where some of the key results will be presented. But Professor Edgar Erdwisch is going to present for us some of the results on material efficiency strategies for a low-carbon future, a global report that actually came out in 2020. So if Edgar, you are online, thank you, Edgar. The floor is yours.
Jonathan, my name is Edgar Hertwig. I'm a professor at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, and I'm happy if you could present my first slide. So this is work that we did initially. The report that Jonathan mentioned was commissioned by the Italian government as part of the G7 and was called Resource Efficiency and Climate Change. And there was a whole team of authors. One of the lead co-authors was Reed Lifset at Yale University, who did the policy piece. Next slide, please. The background for this is that about 23% of global greenhouse gas emissions in 2015 were due to the production of materials. And this is a fact that has been often overlooked, that this has grown to become such an important contributor to the problem. And we see here that iron and other metals are the most important category of materials that cause emissions in their production, followed by cement and other minerals that are mostly used in the construction sector. And so next slide. The buildings and construction sector over the years was responsible for between 40 and 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions associated with materials. And the next important sector was actually machinery and equipment, followed by vehicles. So in the IRP study, we looked at residential buildings and at cars as specific examples to be addressed, example products. Next slide, please. And there was a number of strategies that we investigated. Obviously, if you look at the whole life cycle of a product, you need to start with the design. How is the product designed? And so making lighter products, there's ample opportunities for buildings to choose structural solutions that require less materials and make sure that there is sufficient but not over design of the buildings. Next step is that you could actually choose more environmentally friendly materials, substitute the materials. We looked here at as wood as a construction material, replacing steel and cement. You could improve fabrication yields, reduce waste at the construction site. You can use buildings more intensively, so stacking several uses on top of each other, making sure that the space is well used. And that means that you require less building space to fulfill the same needs. Use buildings for longer so that they don't need to be replaced as frequently. Recover some components to be reused or recycle materials at the end of life. Now, a lot of recycling of metal already happens, and that leads to significant greenhouse gas savings. And so the potential of further increases in recycling are somewhat limited. So we considered that as well, but as you will see, it didn't play such a large role. Next step. Next slide, sorry. So we conducted a scenario analysis in which we compared scenarios where material efficiency was implemented with scenarios where it was not implemented. And here you see for the G7 countries in 2016 that most of the greenhouse gas emissions were associated with the production of energy, but that materials still played a significant part. And assuming a 2-degree pathway for the energy system, we see that emissions would be reduced substantially due to the introduction of renewables and increases in energy efficiency by 2050. And here the dynamics of the building stock also play an important role. If we, on top of that, introduce all these 7 material efficiency strategies, then we see that there would be about a 35% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions that comes about half from the saving of materials and the other half from the savings of energy, mostly operational energy. Next slide. Now, the situation in China and India, for which we also conducted the calculation, show that, as Jonathan indicated, in some of the emerging economies, materials are much more important contributor to emissions from buildings, partly because there is less need for buildings to be heated because of warmer climates than in the G7 countries, but also because there is such a much larger growth in the building stock than in G7 countries. We expect that due to a flattening off of the construction rate, but also an improve in energy efficiency by 2050, there would again be a reduction in greenhouse gas emissions in the 2-degree scenario. Next. But as through the implementation of material efficiency, we could actually reduce those emissions by 60% compared to a scenario without the material efficiency strategies. So here we see that most of the reductions would actually come in the savings of materials. In the course between now and 2050, these decarbonization of materials production of cement and steel production is hopefully getting underway, but it is very unlikely that this would be widely implemented in emerging economies. So it is quite clear that these strategies that we are looking at, saving materials, reducing the need for materials, have an important contribution to play. Next slide. It was actually the more intensive use of materials, that means reducing the need for additional building space, that was most important of all the strategies we looked at. Next. Then there was the stakeholder workshop that GIZ funded, a set of stakeholder workshops, and here I would like to acknowledge my co-authors from the University College London who were in charge of the stakeholder process. Next. And there we had both online and in-person engagement in these 3 countries. Next. And we conducted calculations for each of the countries that were specific, so modeling that was specific by building archetypes that were fit to the local architecture and considering local climatic conditions. Next. These actually showed that there was a substantial saving that we could obtain. Next. So here is the example for Indonesia, where the use of local building materials like bamboo, in addition to space-efficient design and other factors, could lead to a substantial reduction in greenhouse gas emissions per square meter of different residential building types. Next. And this would lead to savings that were substantial for the Indonesian case here on the order of 1 billion ton, together with the decarbonization of the materials production. Next. So in the stakeholder process, We engaged local stakeholders from ministries, from construction companies, from universities, and organizations, and introduced them to the idea, and they identified opportunities and barriers. Next. So we actually set for each of the country prioritized goals together with the stakeholders, identified country-specific barriers, described solutions of how to overcome these barriers, and identified those actors that would need to take those solutions. In general, I found attending stakeholder workshops that the idea of material efficiency was intuitively grasped by the stakeholders and was tied to the idea of energy efficiency, but was seen as something new that could make an additional and important contribution to meeting climate change mitigation goals. Next. And we expect the reports to be out and released by UNEP in the course of the next month. So please stay tuned at the resource panel channel. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Edgar. I mean, resource efficiency in UNEP has been something we've been working on for many, many years already. It's not something new. You know, we are mandated on SDG 12, which is sustainable consumption and production, and that's also where all this work is closely linked to. But it's great to see now this closer link also to climate change, because that was something that actually really was brought forward with the report that Edgar talked about. And specifically interesting also to see now that we are bringing this at the country level and trying to really come up with what does it mean in the specific context of a country. So Edgar, thank you very much for the presentation. I think now we will move to the next presentation that we have, where we will present about the report that was developed under the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. I would like to invite Hind Wildman, who is the Director of Communications and Development at Yale Center for Ecosystems and Architecture. Hind, the floor is yours. And
thank you, Jonathan. I'm honored to be here with you. I'm okay? It's good? Good. So thank you for having me today, and I'm honored to be here with you to talk to you about this report. As you can see from this statement, building materials are set to dominate climate change. The title of our report is called Building Materials and the Climate, Constructing a New Future, a report that shed light on the critical relationship between building materials and the climate. Our world is facing a critical challenge. Today, the built environment contributes to 37% of global emissions, as you can see from here. And this is a number that will rise to 50% by 2050, and this if we continue as we are. So this clearly represents a serious challenge to our climate goals. We need to rethink how we use building materials from start to finish and understand their global impact. So to tackle this, we have a global team from 6 continents that came together, and this team includes architects, engineers, scientists, industry specialists, and others, and they produced this comprehensive report. This report offers valuable insights and recommendations to decarbonize the building and construction sector. If we want to hit our target of a net zero in building constructions by the mid-century, we urgently need to come up with new and collaborative approaches to building materials. To effectively address climate change, we need to recognize the entire life cycle of building materials and the global material supply chain. So in this report, we also focus on radical cooperation across stakeholders who are part or who to become part of the built environment process. Our aim is to create a circular material economy that is compatible with natural systems and regional ecosystems. So throughout our history, we've mostly been building with bio and earth-based process, and we've built massive global cities. As you can see in here, until 1945, most materials used globally were natural and came from Earth. For a number of years now, we've increasingly relied on non-renewable resources, and it's in the majority of building materials today. So in this report, the authors outline a three-part strategy framework that could decarbonize the industry. First, with avoid waste through a circular approach. Second, with shift to a sustainable material. And third, with improve the production of extractive materials. Now, I just want to take a moment, and I'm going to dive in each of these strategies that are here on the screen. So, with avoid, there is a massive opportunity to really reduce the amount of waste that is coming out of each stage in the building across material life cycle. In a circular economy, extending a building life is the most valuable and the least wasteful option. This involves building less by prioritizing renovation and use of existing buildings. Next best case scenario is to reuse components. This is much easier if we include strategies during planning and design stages. We need to design this in a circular material for disassembly and reassembly. Next option is for material reuse and remanufacturing. This prevents the need for extractions of non-renewable minerals for new materials manufacturing. This approach will in turn help with the reducing of embodied carbon. In a circular economy model, the goal is to eliminate waste completely by focusing on reusing, repairing, and recycling. So, in conclusion here, with the avoid strategy, we need to build to last or keep existing building in place. We must avoid new constructions and extractions. Building less here and repurposing existing structures generate 50 to 75% fewer emissions than new constructions. So this shows the significant environmental benefit of choosing renovation over new building projects. So moving on to shift, one of the most promising shifts outlined in this report is the transition to renewable bio-based material, which have a tremendous amount of value. They possess a unique capacity to be produced at a lower carbon footprint. Linking regenerative farming and forestry is absolutely key for reducing the carbon footprint of our materials economy. Using more bio-based building materials such as timber, bamboo, and local source earth in constructions can lead to lower carbon emissions. So among various options, timber stands out, especially with advancement in mass timber technologies. Local and regional studies have shown that replacing steel and concrete with mass timber in constructions could drive down carbon emission between 14 and 31%. So this is quite significant. Aside from timber, bamboo is the front runner, and this is due to its rapid growth in and carbon cycle. However, important to note that the carbon benefit from using materials like laminated bamboo can be offset by the use of treatments such as chemicals and glues. And also important to note that the enhancement aimed at boosting mechanical performance can also ultimately result in carbon emissions, similar to those we found in steel today. Also, living with biomass on walls and roofs can be an important low-carbon materials for cities in the future. The overall highlight here is that shifting toward materials with lower embodied carbon emissions, such as timber and bamboo, could ultimately lead to a 40% saving in the sector by 2060. So for the third principle, improve, for material producers, prioritizing the decarbonization of conventional material processing is absolutely crucial. This includes materials like concrete, steel, aluminium, plastic, glass, and bricks. As you can see from here, there's a lot of writing, but those are the materials we're talking about right now on the left-hand side. So we recommend electrifying and decarbonizing the energy that is used to produce and maintain materials building and urban infrastructure across their life cycle. By 2060, we think, or we're still going to be producing a tremendous amount of non-renewable, and that include concrete, steel, and other conventional materials. So therefore, we need to radically decarbonize these processes within the next couple of decades as we build in this global construction boom that we are currently experiencing. So just to put this in perspective, we are currently adding megacities the size of Paris every single month, and we need to figure out how to decarbonize the construction sector. So we think that if these measures can be adopted and adapted, then we think that reducing embodied carbon in building to net zero can absolutely be achievable by 2050. So, of course, to implement this pathway that we just seen, it's absolutely essential that every stakeholders in the building and construction industry collaborate and work hand in hand to drive the much needed transformation in the sector. In addition to the actions of individual stakeholders, we also need a number of policy changes to support the decarbonization of building materials, such as implementing carbon pricing policies, public procurement policies, and we think that this is essential, investing in research and development. So, in conclusion, we think that implementing the pathway outlined in this report, building materials and the climate, constructing a new future, it's absolutely crucial. And we think that by embracing the framework, the shift, avoid, and improve framework, and supporting necessary policy changes, we can accelerate decarbonization in the building and construction sector by 2060. And thereby, we can create a more sustainable built environment for the future. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hint. So, now we've seen two presentations that lay out quite a number of issues that we have around this issue of materials that we all know that we need to address. And I now want to invite a few of experts that are also working on this specific topic to join me here. So I would like to invite Dima HEP, I'm not sure whether I pronounce it right, but I hope so, the vice chair, the leader with Harrop's Cities and Planning and Design team. And then I would like to invite Anna Dyson, the director of the Yale Center for Ecosystems and Architecture. And I would like to also invite Robert Spencer, vice chair of the Sustainable Development Committee of the International Federation of Consulting Engineers and director of Sustainable Development at AECOM. I'm wondering whether I stand here or come and sit there with you. Thank you. Okay, so thank you for being with us here. I'm gonna have like a question for each of you, and I will start with Dima actually, and I would like to ask you, Dima, if you can explain a little bit what is, the new concept of embodied carbon, of embodied nature, in buildings.
Yes, I think, so I don't know how many of you have heard about this, but we've just heard that, nature is in crisis. We know that the built environment is contributing significantly to the degradation of nature and nature loss. But when we look at buildings, and some of the colleagues that presented today, what we found is actually only 5% of the impact of building is actually on the building site, and 95% of the impacts are actually off-site. And what this means is that in the material extraction, in the manufacturing, but also in the transport of this materiality. So we need to start thinking about materiality and broad materials in the design process, but as well as in the procurement process and when contractors actually design the buildings. So that's really important. When we look at then the whole life carbon cycle, we can learn so much from that could be applicable to a whole life nature cycle. Of course, there are some differences, but there's a lot that we can learn. First of all, in the approach. Second, in the language. So we can start thinking about embodied carbon, embodied nature. And then third, that we cannot borrow necessarily from that is the metrics and the measurements, because it's way more complex to measure nature and nature impacts. When you look at GHG emissions, I think it's easy because it's easy to quantify and measure, but with nature, it's very much localized, and sometimes you cannot really think about the cause and effect, like you don't know what actually caused that specific nature loss. And therefore, what we're saying is that it's time for us to think about, and develop, we're trying to develop this with WBCSD, a whole life nature impact assessment that looks at the entire cycle of a building. This is what we're trying to do. And if we don't do that, then actually we're going to have more nature loss in the future.
Thank you, Dima. I think that is excellent. I mean, certainly for me, working at the United Nations Environment Programme, nature is one of our very important pillars, and that's also what we've been working on. I know it's complicated. I mean, for many years, we're looking at, economic analysis of like ecosystems. What are the benefits of ecosystems? How can you integrate that costing also actually into the actions? And I think that's a very critical element that we need to move into. Of course, here we're at the climate COP. Of course, we've been looking at embodied carbon. Carbon has been one of the topics that is very high on the agenda for a number of years now. But we don't need to forget all the rest. And I mean, also in the materials report, when we look at all these issues, there's a lot of impact on resources overall. And that, I mean, especially the work of the International Resource Panel has been looking more broadly at natural resources and the impacts that we're having there. So it's very, very, I really like it.
Yes, and I was just going to add, in fact, that, there's also frameworks out there that are trying to look at metrics and measurement, but from a corporate level, like the Task Force for Nature, TNFD, like the SBT and the Science-Based Targets for Nature. So there is a place to start from, hopefully, but I think we need to kind of start accelerating that.
I definitely agree. I think we need to integrate all these things a little bit back, going back to the topic of sustainable development instead of looking at climate a little bit more in a silo, I think, and this comes a lot now, I think, in all the conversations that we're having in climate. We're talking about just transition, we're talking about the broader impacts and integrating. So I think we're back on track, hopefully. Thank you very much. My next question actually will be for, sorry, my next question is actually for Anna Dyson. I would like to, no, actually, sorry, I'm confused a bit. Robert, my next question is for you. So I would like you to tell me a bit on how to integrate the natural system with design to support infrastructure performance, resource efficiency, and its link to circularity.
Very, very happy to, Jonathan. Thanks for the question. So I've been working with my team at AECOM and with FIDIC, the Global Federation for Consulting Engineers, and with the Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF. And we've recognized that there needs to be a lot more guidance and resources available for engineers in the infrastructure industry, in particular the design engineers in civils and structures, to understand how to effectively work with nature to integrate natural systems into typical hard infrastructure design in order to benefit from natural systems' ability to sequester carbon, to improve biodiversity and indeed replenish and rewild biodiversity, and also significantly to enhance resilience and enable more resilience. So what I wanted to highlight is that I think it's essential for there to be a bit of a coming together even deeper between the natural world and natural system and natural resource manager practitioners and the engineering practitioners in order to achieve this. So with the guide, we're effectively going upstream to right up to the beginning of the project life cycle, hopefully, where you can actually avoid significantly harming nature and actually look to integrate natural systems into the infrastructure design process. And to your points about how challenging it is to measure nature, clearly you do need to have that expertise in natural capital assessment and natural capital accounting in order to provide the engineering community with a sense of what the natural assets are, so that they can integrate their functionality into their design process, because engineers like to use standard processes. They like to know what they're dealing with in terms of an asset's performance, how long it will last, what kind of loads it will bear, what kind of effects it can have. And so we really need to use this extra data and digital interfaces that we're getting around nature now to be able to help the engineering community really incorporate all the amazing technologies, if you like, that nature offers in terms of, flood abatement, water retention, water purification, air quality improvement, shading, cooling, all these things, all these amazing things that we know nature does and that we love experiencing as well. We humans, we love to be in nature, we love to be around nature. We don't like to be in places where it's just cold steel and concrete and nothing to, lift our spirits. And so, I think this is a really valuable tool. I'll just say a few words about how the tool or the resource has been developed. So it's very much focused around sectors. So the typology of sectors. Are you working in a transportation project? Are you working on a buildings project? Are you working in a water utility? And then looking at the benefits of the natural solutions for those types of infrastructure assets. So it could be coastal defense, it could be flood abatement, and then looking at the specific solutions that you can integrate from the natural world into your design process in order to get a more of a sort of hybrid nature hard infrastructure, or indeed a full-on nature infrastructure solution. So I'll leave it there as a bit of a taster for the approach, and I hope that it's something that people can go and look up. If you just Google FIDIC WWF Nature Playbook, it's very easy to find. And we are going to improve it. It's like a live document, and there are extra chapters that we want to write about. Thinking about our circular economy conversation yesterday, procurement, how do we help clients procure these new ways of thinking about integrating nature into infrastructure? And then the investors are very keen on investing in nature. How can we show the investors how a nature infrastructure approach would include lots of benefits that the investors want to see in their portfolios? and then standardization, coming back to your point about how do we standardize the metrics, how do we standardize the language. Nature language is very confusing to people who aren't used to talking about nature. When you talk about ecosystem services and functionality and pollination, all these different services, that how does that link to my engineering transportation project? We've got to make the communication and translate the language so that the engineering community feel really confident in taking this approach.
Thank you, Robert. I mean, definitely, I think the nature is something that we used to actually live in nature and work with nature and do things with nature. And then we also had a lot of great ideas, but then now we're realizing that a lot of our great ideas are not so great anymore. So I think we need to go back a little bit like, how do we work with nature? How do we understand nature? And how can we use the services that nature is providing us and bring I would say emulate or make them even stronger for us so that we work with the nature to actually serve us as human beings. So we're part of nature. I think that's something that we forgot a little bit over the last few hundred years, I think. So good that we're trying to get back to that. Hopefully it's not too late. And I think this links well also for me with the adaptation agenda, because we're talking here about decarbonization, but we all know that adaptation is really a priority now. And I personally say often that our mitigation agenda is part of our adaptation strategy. Why are we doing this? Because actually we needed to change the way we are doing things. So it's adapting in a way. Anyway, Anna, I'm coming over to you now. And I know you're doing a lot of work also since ecosystems and architecture, so there's a close link to ecosystem. But the question I'm going to ask you is, how can we put in place the avoid, shift, improve approach to increase resource efficiency and reduce emissions of materials?
Okay. Well, and thank you to my colleague Hin Wildman, who provided an overview. One of the most important things in our report is that we advocate for a life cycle approach. So that means both that legislators and in policy, we need to simultaneously support producers and consumers of materials. An example of that Edgar gave of recycling in metals is an example where we will have chicken and egg problems if we don't simultaneously support, for example, designers to design for disassembly and reassembly and increase or close the growing gap between the demand, for example, for secondary materials and the supply. So it's absolutely critical. One of the hardest things for us as in the design industries, AEC industries, is to truly design for circularity. It means greatly expanding our life cycle assessment to include the work of the geobiosphere. So we were talking a lot on this panel about designing with nature-based solutions, and it's true that we focus in our report on the importance, for example, of including living biomass structures for all sorts of reasons, urban heat island mitigation, increase in biodiversity, increase in acoustical benefits and biophilia benefits, so many different water retention, et cetera. But in addition to that, currently our assessment practices are rarely including the impact of the impact on the work of the geobiosphere of our material extraction processes. So what that means is that many, for example, bio-based, so-called nature-based solutions coming from forestry or agriculture or other provenance get a pass if they're produced with renewable electrification, for example. But that's only taking into account the carbon in the life cycle assessment. So what we really need to do is start from the get-go to really put the pressure on third-party fair certification of processes where we can really understand the impacts on geobiosphere, both locally and globally, of extraction processes. And that would include all of the so-called bio-based or biogenic nature-based processes. So legislation, fair labeling and certification, and I think, Jonathan, you brought up something absolutely critical, is that we have to put humans also back into the ecosystem. If we're going to be in accounting for natural processes and life cycle assessments, that means we have to put labor and fair labor into the equation. And this is something that was really focused on in our partnership in the report with Design for Freedom movement, is looking at that relationship between social ethics in the production of ethical decarbonization and impacts on built environment and climate effects. So that relationship between in ESG, or environmental social, we need the E and the S really to leverage each other in these certification and verification processes. We've done this. We've managed to do this in other fields. It's emerging in food and textiles and other fields where we're getting greater and greater transparency in the data flows. We need to see that kind of transparency in the built environment. Why? Because we're dealing with integrated systems by the time we get to a building site. And the provenance of individual materials within those integrated systems is extremely difficult to track. And already the effects on the geobiosphere, already the effects on nature have long been impacted by the time we see design decisions on a construction site.
Thank you very much, Anna. So thanks for these additional insights. We have actually a recorded message now from one of our partners, so I'm kindly inviting you to move back to the room. Unfortunately, I don't have much time for questions. We have many speakers today, but I would like to introduce Adriana Garcia. She was actually one of the national experts that was involved in developing the work on the material efficiency strategies for the building and construction sector in Argentina. So the work that Edgar has been talking about earlier. And she's going to present a little bit and talk a little bit more about some of the findings of that process in Argentina. Adriana, if you are online. Video, oh sorry, I forgot. Okay, so please, I'll let you run the video then.
Good morning. I would like to thank the organizing team of this event. It's a true honor to be part of this discussion panel. We briefly share the findings that emerged from the IRP study in Argentina. They look at the new challenges and what will be required of different actors in future scenarios. Integration, inclusion, sustainable development, innovation and technology, new skills associated with environmental quality and resource efficiency. What is the current situation? The nation is committed to global initiative, evident in the enactment of Law 27,520. This law defines minimum budget for environmental protection, emphasizing action for climate change, adaptation and mitigation. Argentina aims not to exceed 349 megatons of carbon dioxide equivalent by 2030, as per the 2020 report. Let's review our goals. Contextualize global findings and recommendations from the RIBA report in Argentina. Address specific aspects of national priorities and context. Emphasize material efficiency strategies with the greatest potential to reduce GHG emissions. Engage in consultation with key local actors through workshops. Identify national priorities and sensitize stakeholders. As part of the study, the key actors who participated in 2 workshops in Buenos Aires were identified. Material efficiency strategies, design, promotional action, and priorities were also proposed. Here are some key recommendations. Record data on low carbon material and monitor progress. Provide technical and financial support for policy development. invest in R&D of new technology on low carbon materials, deepen stakeholder consultation and increase public awareness, incorporate building demolition, material reuse and recycling into policies and frameworks. Let's conclude with these ideas. Argentina NDC shapes a comprehensive plan to reduce GHG emission. Regional differences necessitate tailored approach in standard energy use and materials. Integration of demolition, in the recycling and material reuse companies is crucial. Existing policies of energy efficiency, like the energy efficiency label, are in place. Emerging market design focuses policies for meaningful change. A new concrete technology code incorporates up to 30% recycled aggregate is pending approval, promoting a future optimized design with low clinker factor cement. As I always say, our commitment to implementing sustainable construction practices will play a pivotal role in realizing the future we envision. Thanks for your attention. Let's keep the conversation going over email and have a nice day.
So this was our first presentation to talk about more. Not sure whether my microphone works. Okay, I just wanted to say that this was the first step of talking a little bit at what happens at the country level, or at least some work that is happening really in a country. You can see that in the context here of Argentina, but I've seen it for a number of other countries. Actually, this issue of materials is really picking up. There's a lot of interest to see some things happening. On our side, we are working currently with 4 countries: Bangladesh, India, Ghana, and Senegal, specifically looking at the building and construction sector, of course, and looking at what can we do in those countries to address the materials, but also looking more this whole idea of with local materials, how can you increase the number of potential jobs, and countries. A number of countries actually rely on quite a number of imports also, so that's quite a challenge for them also. I was expecting a colleague from Bangladesh to join, but I see that she unfortunately has not joined us yet. But, well, at least I have 2 of my panel members here, so I'm going to invite Professor Graham Maidman from the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero of the UK government to join me here on stage, and then also Mr. Duncan Baker-Brown from the Royal Institute of British Architects. So we'll have a 2 people's panel and probably more focus on the UK, but I think I have a few of my friends here in the room that maybe can come in a little bit later, and I can also ask them to say a few things about their countries, because I see my friends from Senegal here and also from Ghana. So good. So I'm going to ask Duncan first. And Duncan, can you talk a bit specifically? Okay, sorry, I'm getting confused with my questions here.
I can talk about whatever you want.
Great. No, so to promote the importance of operational energy and embodied carbon standards, pointing to examples of the UK net zero carbon building standard to be used in the world 2030 climate challenge, what does net zero look like, and what are the possibilities for collaboration?
Yeah, thank you. Good morning, everybody. My name's Duncan Baker-Brown. I co-chair the Climate Action Expert Advisory Group for the Royal Institute of British Architects, and I'm an academic as well as a practicing architect, and I sit on the governance panel for the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard, which is being developed at the moment. And what's exciting about it is it's got cross-sector involvement. So what we're aiming to do is provide a sort of set of rules that we can take to central government and say, this is how to meet whole life carbon targets. This is how the construction sector in the UK can spend its very limited carbon budget. And we're hoping to do that in the new year and affect change via building regulations and policy, which is what we really need to do now. I would say as a practicing architect, I've focused on the circular economy for the last 15 years. And I think for architects and engineers and clients, we just really need to see what good looks like. So I really focus on finding case studies of buildings that deliver on what's been talked about today. We can keep banging on with really scary statistics. In 2010, humans extracted between 45 and 60 billion tons of stuff from the planet every year. It's now up to about 130 billion tons of stuff. The built environment weighs more than the biosphere. The construction industry consumes. How do we know that? I don't know. But anyway. It's a good one. But we know we've consumed and built a lot of stuff. And the construction sector consumes about 50% of everything mined and harvested every year. In the UK, the construction sector's responsible for nearly 65% of all our waste flows. That compares with Europe, where it's between 35 and 45%. We're up to 63%. So we really need to understand how to reuse. Recycling's all right, but recycling can often mean unexpected carbon burps that we don't really need. So we really need to look at how we can design our future buildings, our buildings now, to be material stores for the future. And I'm really interested in the people who can deconstruct the buildings we think we can't deconstruct. So, I've got a book coming out in the new year, and I'm not here plugging the book, but what's the good thing is that it's got 40 case studies from across Europe of buildings that have been deconstructed and created a material source for new buildings, or new buildings that are designed without sticking them together so they can be a material source in the future. We can design enduring buildings, durable buildings, but in a couple of years' time, for some reason, they might be in the wrong place or they might not work very well. So the big thing is don't stick your buildings together. We can also design right now, I come from London in the UK. Within 50 kilometers of the center of London are working woodlands that the Romans gave us that are still intact. They're huge carbon sinks. They're coppice woodlands. You chop the trees down, but you don't kill the root system. The root system is a deep carbon sink. And if you specify timber from these woodlands, which I do and other architects can do, you actually actively encourage a greater level of biodiversity. And I challenge anybody to do better than that. Actually specify a material for your building that encourages increased biodiversity. These things are doable now. So I just think we need to look and see what good looks like. And I think it's the responsibility of people like me to raise awareness of that, because the statistics are just so scary. We need to show what good looks like.
Thank you very much, Duncan.
I don't even know if that answered your question, actually. Just desperate to say that.
No, but I think you made very important points. I mean, I think it's all about your last point about, we need to raise the awareness and get the people on board and make them understand where we are today is a critical point.
Well, the presentations before were so inspiring around what we need to do. And what I'm saying is people are doing it.
Yeah.
And that's where the light's got to be shone now, encouraging and incentivizing other people to do what is actually being done at the moment. A lot of people think nothing's being done. We're understanding what needs to be done. But actually lots is being done, and puts me in a good place.
But we still need to bring it at an even bigger scale, I think, overall, because that's the challenge, I think.
I know of quite big schemes as well doing it, but
yeah, no, but I think one thing we have to remember is that a lot of people do a lot of self-construction, and especially if we go to some of the countries that we work with, it's actually not the bigger companies that are doing it, and that's where I think we really need to make sure that the materials are available for them so that they use the right materials, and maybe also even train some of those people to actually use the materials in the right way, because they're going to do it themselves. They're not even going to rely on...
We've definitely got to get site-specific with the strategies, yes, and regionally specific,
Specifically. So I'm just looking at some of my colleagues here in the room, because I know that before I move to you, I just want to maybe get a few perspectives from a few countries, that since I know I have my colleagues here. So maybe I can I can ask Chris, from Ghana Ministry of Construction, to say me a few things about Ghana.
I think I'm with you. I mean, where we have to go is advocacy. I think these discussions normally happen at the global level, the macro level, but at the subnational level, it seems the discussions are not there. In my country, we are trying to promote some of these initiatives, but unfortunately, it happens at the national level. And when you go on the ground, they don't really appreciate what we are talking about. And that is where we have to go. We have to elevate the discussions beyond this platform and delve deeper to the local level for them to understand what we are doing. What happens in my country is that when it comes to implementation of these action areas, it happens at the subnational level. That is where the action happens. But how do they understand some of these initiatives? I think we have to elevate the discussions again and train people at the subnational level to appreciate the impact we are trying to make so that we don't leave it at this platform only. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chris. I think it's important to remember the role of cities, the role of local governments, and that's now the next step. We need to make sure they are the ones who are actually implementing building regulations and doing the procurement for a number of the projects, giving the permits out most of the time for the buildings. So there's a quite important element to actually really get all these people on board. And as Chris was saying, we're often talking to a lot of colleagues here that are already convinced. How do we go out and talk actually to the ones that we still need to convince? The other part I think that is important there is that, the perceptions of people, because for many years we've been saying, if you have succeeded in your life, you're living in a nice concrete building that is a good air conditioner inside. Now these things are changing, actually. What is funny is that when you go to Africa and you go to a resort, a luxury resort, most of the time it's going to be constructed with local materials, but it's basically now the luxury people that are kind of going in those places, and the local people that actually, they don't want to live in a mud house anymore, or they don't think it's actually a technology that is a good technology for housing. And so bringing back and changing the perception on all this is going to be also a hard work, especially in those different regions. And I lost my scenario here, sorry. Because we're missing some of our colleagues that were supposed to join, but I thank very much Chris for coming in here. And actually, I have you a little bit later in my scenario. So, but I was thinking maybe I can take a few questions from the floor if there is. And you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, so I'll stand. So my name is Esther Obonyo. I'm from Penn State University. I'm a faculty member. I'm originally from Kenya and Tanzania. I was actually very interested in a lot of the things that were being said, and coming now back to the comment that you've made about materials and developing countries, but then I'm thinking also about how I was educated. I went to school at the University of Nairobi for my bachelor's degree, and I interact with them, I interact with the students and the lecturers, and to a large extent, nothing has changed. I'm a professor. I can say, my students at Penn State, they're getting a little bit more of the current information about the good practices. We educate based on the industry demands. We educate based on the future employers. So how do we close the loop on this type of conversations, first from a global north to global south and back to the global north? And also, how do we bring in the higher education space that responds to what the industry and what the governments are telling us about employing, what is employable?
Can I take it from the UK, because I do not want to be telling other people how to do it. But I'm a principal lecturer at the University of Brighton, so I'm running a postgraduate design studio at the moment. And our students in the UK are demanding change. There's headlines in the press regularly that students aren't being taught the right stuff. And so I think it's different in different places, you know, but I think it's really exciting at the moment in the UK because we have students demanding a climate literate education, and you know, if they're not getting it, they're protesting and striking. So we've got quite a disruptive environment in the UK at the moment, which is great. We've also what appears to have we appear to have you know, the old guard trying to learn what to do as well. So, and that's what I mean by the UK Net Zero Carbon Building Standard. It's all the different institutes and government and client-facing groups. The RIBA are promoting their 2030 climate challenge to our 50,000 members. So I think it's an interesting discussion, but I sympathize. I mean, when I was, I wrote a book called The Reuse Atlas, and I interviewed Francis Kéré from Burkina Faso. And he said the biggest challenge he had building in his country was telling the people who are going to actually construct the buildings of his libraries and schools that they didn't have to use concrete and steel. They could use the materials of the landscape and just had to remember back a couple of generations or a couple of decades to how they did that before. And he's been very successful doing that. But he did say, honestly, that was the biggest challenge, getting away from the preconceived idea that good looks like concrete and steel. So I think there's a lot of good going on. I think there's a lot of good going on in academia as well. And the climate crisis is the #1 issue in academia at the moment, and climate literacy is as well. But I agree, I've got a role as climate literacy champion in our university, and it's not for the students, it's for the staff.
Thank you, Duncan. Complex issue. I know that you have a network also with different universities around the world, and we are also trying to collaborate here on that one. But definitely, that's the idea. Also, how can we bring the universities and the people that are actually working there to start teaching what needs to be taught?
But I'd also say, being in charge of research funding, you go where the research funding at the moment is a lot of it's around the environment. So that sort of tells you where we need to be.
That's a good sign. Thank you very much. You'd like to have a question? Okay, I'm going to give you the quick floor for a quick question, and then I need to move to my next.
I can also address my question during my concluding remarks, but just wanted to pick up on one thing. I think it's really interesting. You've addressed two of the aspects of the triple planetary crisis: climate change, biodiversity. But I'm missing the non-toxic environment, and I'm also wondering about deconstruction. How do we deal? How do we make sure that what we are then reusing is sound, is non-toxic, and I think that's something that also consumers are very, very attuned to. I would love to have a discussion about affordability, because I think also my personal experience has been that you can find beautiful, lovely, triple planetary sound buildings, but they are not affordable to us all. Thank you.
Thank you. Duncan, I don't know if you want to...
I'd only say that, yeah, I agree as a general point of view that non-toxic environments are expensive, unfortunately, because of what we've done in the last 75 years. But we've got to, health and well-being is a big deal. What I would say is that I could point you into the direction of case studies where people have saved money by doing what you're talking about. So, by reusing instead of buying new, you can save money. And I think it's a big challenge, a design challenge for our industry. And that's why I think we need our best, most creative designers focused on reuse and adaptive architecture. And that's where they've got to do. That's the big challenge. But I would also say, when you're talking about using organic materials from the biosphere, the last thing you want to be doing is adding toxins to that, because then there's no end-of-life strategy for that toxic timber. And that's what's happening to mass timber at the moment. There's a lot of chemicals being added to it, which means that, well, it's all right while it's being reused, deconstructed or reconstructed, that's great, but it's never going to be part of the biosphere in a healthy way.
Thank you, Duncan. And that's also a topic that we're also working actually with the chemicals team on, all the issues related to the toxic materials that you have inside of materials and what challenges you have there also in terms of recycling, reuse also in some cases. And that's also, I think, an important element on how can we actually, take out some of those toxic chemicals that are, harmful chemicals that we have in a number of the building materials. And that's not easy, of course. No, that's also an element that we're trying to link to in our work overall. So, thank you, Duncan.
Thank you.
Kindly invited to leave the stage. But thanks for having done the panel on your own, because actually we didn't have any other panel members in the room. And thanks, Chris, for shipping in. And at least it gave me the opportunity to give the floor for a few questions, because we didn't really have that much space for it. So next step is actually for me. I'm going to talk a little bit about international platforms and collaboration. And specifically talk about some of the work that we're doing under the GlobalABC and the One Planet Network. So for a number of years, actually, we have been working under the One Planet Network on a sustainable buildings and construction program that was actually under the resource efficiency agenda for UNEP. And in parallel, we had another initiative, which was the Global Alliance for Buildings and Construction. And we've now brought these two streams together, which is better for me, because actually everything is under one platform and it's easier to work under one platform overall. So the work that we started actually with the government of Finland, that has been supporting this resource efficiency agenda for many years already, is actually now continuing under the GlobalABC, and we're strengthening the links between our work that is looking at SDG 12, resource efficiency overall, and sustainable consumption and production, and our work on climate more specifically. So I think I have a few slides here, and I probably need to take this one. Here. Oh. Let's see. So yeah, just to give a little bit of a perspective, on the one end, we have, the global strategy for sustainable consumption and production 23 to 2030 that has a long history, because it started already more than 10 years ago. There was actually a renewal of the mandate of the 10-year framework program on sustainable consumption and production. And we came up with like a new strategy under the One Planet Network that looks specifically at enabling changes to circularity and transformative multi-stakeholder public-private partnerships, tools and solutions. And specifically looking at some of the high-impact sectors, and there specifically the buildings and construction is one of them. The objective here is to support the governments. Oh, sorry, I'm confused with the one next door. So the objective here is, of course, to support the governments, but the private sector and the other stakeholders to have access to strategic principles and tools and solutions. I'm probably standing in front of the that can help mainstreaming a holistic approach for buildings and construction infrastructure to a whole life cycle approach. So that's the objective of the strategy today of the 10-year framework program on sustainable buildings. Oh, I'm really getting tired after so many days at the COP, it seems. But so on our work on resource efficiency more specifically. So the two communities now are coming together, as I mentioned, under the GlobalABC Materials Hub, and there we established what we call now a Sustainable Built Environment Working Group. So with the Sustainable Buildings and Construction Program, we've actually been working on that topic for quite a number of years. And we have specifically issued a number of reports that were looking at circularity in buildings and construction. So there was a global state of play report, but we also did 6 reports that were regional reports, specifically what it means in the different regions, and how do you look at what is the status of circularity, and actually what needs to be done to integrate more circularity in the buildings and construction sector. And from that, we also have a number of case studies that we've put forward that specifically looking at the SDGs. So we've been taking a broader approach. It has never been a focus only on SDG 13, which is climate change, but we've actually been looking at all the SDGs and how do they link to circularity in the built environment. And at the latest work that we did together with some of our partners, UNEP on my side, but UN Habitat and UNOPS, is that we were developing a toolkit to actually work with the countries to identify what are their needs in terms of circularity, where do they stand, and how can they implement circularity in buildings and construction. And the program that I'm now implementing with my colleagues sitting here from Ghana and Senegal and also in Bangladesh and India is a follow-up to this toolkit that we developed, and we're continuing to enhance it, and we are going now to work more in action at the country level on these specific topics. Now, the new Materials Hub, as its mission statement, is actually to say the GlobalABC Materials Hub leads and supports diverse actors from the circular value chain of the built environment in knowledge generation, dissemination, and implementation to apply the Avoid, Shift, Improve framework to construction materials. So we're really building on the work also that we've been doing together with the Yale Center for Ecosystems and Architecture, and now we are aiming with this group to continue really looking at, okay, how do we move towards implementation? What are the tools that are required that the countries might need and the different stakeholders might need? And we're aiming, of course, to support the just transition. We've mentioned that earlier already in our event today, but it's about people. And so it's really important that when we look at these topics, we actually also think about employment, especially when we go to a number of countries. A number of ministries there are not that much interested about mitigation specifically, but they're more interested about their economic and development challenges. So I think the narrative is really important when we push for bringing all these environmental issues that are critical for sustainability. So we have two sub-working groups specifically under that program. One that is looking at circular built environment that is led by the Ministry of Environment of Finland together with the Royal Melbourne Institute of Technology and UNEP. And then we have another working group that is the Whole Life Cycle Policy Coalition that is actually co-led with our colleagues from the UK, and that actually you will be able to say a little bit more about that. And we are also looking now currently at sustainable public procurement and how can we integrate, or how do you integrate circularity in a sense in sustainable public procurement. Under the Whole Life Carbon Policy Coalition, we will actually be looking at, okay, how can we come up with like a common standard in a sense, or a common definition and a common agreement on how do you actually look at whole life carbon. And under the Circular Built Environment program, we are currently working on a framework, continuing the work that we did before to analyze policies and to see how you can actually see the readiness of a country in terms of circularity in the built environment, and coming up with then a number of recommendations or priorities for these different countries. So the circular built environment is, we are supporting countries to increase awareness and buy-in. We've been talking about the importance of awareness, looking at building the capacities and advance the technical policy and market development related to circular built environment. So that's a specific area that we're looking at. As I mentioned, Ministry of Environment Finland, RMIT are the co-leads. We are looking currently at bringing also Habitat for Humanity, because we are having a strong focus on housing. Because I think that the residential sector and housing is a critical one if we really want to make the transformation happen in the buildings and construction sector. We all live in houses. It's like 70% of the buildings that exist. You already know about circular economy, but it's about some of the points that were already raised earlier, also from the study: efficient use of existing buildings, reuse and recycling in new construction and renovation, and ensure that there's life cycle thinking, material efficiency when we are designing our buildings. The design stage is critically important. That's the moment where we can make the right decisions overall. Here you have a QR code where you can know more about our working group, and we actually invite people that are interested to join the working group to join us and work on this topic together. And now I think I'm going to move, finally, and sorry to have kept you waiting. Yeah, please, sorry.
That's okay. Hi everyone, I'm Graham. I'm from the UK, and someone once said to me, never ever start a talk with an apology. Well, I am going to, okay? And my apology is I'm a fake. Okay, I'm a real fake. I'm representing my colleague Melanie, who's leading this initiative, but I'm also a fake because I'm a mature white male from the UK, and I think if you're going to solve this, okay, you've got to, and this is maybe another question that's come in, you've got to be much more representative, okay, of where the construction's going to be. So the figures are, so I'm told, 90% of future construction is going to be in the global south. So me standing here and talking is a bit fake, to be honest with you. Also, actually, I've got limited knowledge of circularity and life cycle assessment, etc. Although I have published some papers on this for data centres. I actually work in cooling, refrigeration, air conditioning, and I just like to just use this as an analogy for where you are. Okay, so I think Dima said early on that. We need to minimise cooling. We need to minimise, and she spoke about passive cooling, nature-based solutions. And for cooling, this is critical. So last year in the UK, we had temperatures of 40.3, I think. Okay, and some of you from the UK, I can sense, but those of you there in the UK when it was 44.3, what was it like? I'm sensing you're from the UK. I don't know if that's correct or not. Sort of boiling. It was boiling. It was terrible. I remember sitting on the sofa thinking, I can't work. Okay, I couldn't work. It was just so horrendous. The really nice thing about nature-based solutions is that actually you passively remove the need for cooling. And there's I don't know if you've come across Freetown as an example. I often call it Freetown, the tree town. Okay, and they've got nature-based solutions everywhere, and you reduce the temperature by 8 degrees in the city with this. And this has got to be the starting point for anything we do in this space. The second thing I wanted just to highlight in cooling, that we need to think about equipment and actually the refreshing of equipment. So supermarkets and data centres are big energy users, okay, and they refresh the equipment every 5 years. Okay, what happens to it? I don't know. Okay, possibly gets skipped and probably doesn't even get recycled. So I think it's really important that we recycle, reuse, remanufacture in this area, and it needs to become embedded in every activity. So I'm gonna be a bit controversial, okay, if I can. Okay, cooling isn't very visible across the world. Everyone just accepts it, you know. But is there a big energy? It's a big energy user, and it's a big carbon emitter. And I think the area you're working in as well is not very visible. It's visible to you. You're all here. You're really excited about it, but it's not very visible. And I think you need to make it much more visible, okay, to the world in order to get traction on it. Okay, I'm being controversial, okay, but I'm sorry about that. We had 3 days ago, and Jonathan's colleague was critical in it, we had the launch of the Global Cooling Pledge here at COP. 66 countries now, I think, have signed it. Okay, it's got 16 commitments. Okay, and it's really, really visible. My minister came along to it. Okay, and he's engaged in it now, and I think you need to do something similar. Okay, the opportunity was 40.3 last year, wildfires everywhere, you know, this is becoming a bigger issue. I think your opportunity is the fact that the grid is decarbonising, embodied emissions will become much more significant. And so I'm putting it out there, this is your time, okay? Apologies if I'm saying that, okay? But it's your time. And I know you're hurrying me up, so that's fine. So anyway, the Whole Life Carbon Policy Coalition was what I was supposed to talk about, and I didn't follow the instructions. But please join this. Okay, policy is critical if you're gonna make that, and a number of people said that. And I think that's probably all I'm going to say, if that's all right, Jonathan.
That's absolutely fine, Graham. And I think you made a good point. We've been trying to give visibility specifically to this sector for a number of years now. At least this year, we also had our big hoo-ha event with the launch of the buildings breakthrough, which was really well attended. And I really hope now we're really bringing a lot of visibility to this very important sector. So thanks a lot, Graham, and thanks for your patience also here.
That's great. Thanks very much, and apologies for my words to everyone, but very nice to see you all. Look forward to seeing you next year.
So just, I see the room is getting a little bit empty here, but the good news is that we have at least 80 people online here. So I want to thank all these people online for following what we're doing here. And I would like to invite Kerstin Stendal, who is the Special Envoy for Climate Change at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Finland, to give some closing remarks.
Jonathan, it's a pleasure to be here. And I would like to thank everyone for really interesting, extremely insightful presentations, thought-provoking presentations, and for me, as I noted in my question, I have worked now as ambassador for climate and environment in Finland for a year, but before that I was working for UNEP, both in the chemicals and hazardous waste sector, as well as for the IPCC, and that's where I sort of also come in and look at these discussions and also note that with decarbonization, we need to also in our cities, we will need to deal with a lot of e-waste that will be coming forth, and also that whole area is something that will go into our circular economy discussions. Finland, of course, is ambitious both when it comes to the climate neutrality target that we have set. It is for 2035. And we are, of course, also have been very active, both in theory and practice when it comes to circular economy and developing that. I am also quite intrigued by this whole discussion because earlier this week I had a chance to also speak at a UN Habitat side event where we were talking about the role of cities and in the future, and there I was also talking about the fact that in Finland at the moment we have 6 of our cities which have pledged to be climate neutral within in 6 years' time. That means that in 6 years' time, 1/3 of the population in Finland will be living in climate neutral cities if we can make this. So so there's a lot of promise in this area, and talking to the mayors of these cities, it is quite clear that they are really keen to see building and construction, working in that sector. And they also say in a situation where a lot of our governments are now dealing with tricky political settings, where we have new winds blowing when it comes to how green should we be. It is for these decision makers in cities easier to tackle climate change, to tackle the triple planetary crisis through concrete projects such as buildings and reconstruction, rather than being forced to defend what we now hear as sort of green fanaticism. So in that sense, this is also a very practical way to move forward. I am here because unfortunately my minister couldn't make it, so I will just very quickly also have a short sort of more formal statement. So Finland is one of the forerunners in Europe for sustainable buildings and construction, and together with other partners, such as in the Nordic countries, we see that we do see that the government has a central role to set the ground for both national policy but also impacting global policy when it comes to the development of circular buildings and construction. Our new Construction Act places a ceiling on emissions from new construction
and sets the maximum size of the carbon footprint from the construction stage to the end of the building's lifespan. The embodied carbon of building materials is a key feature in the new legislation. It puts emphasis on the sustainable use of materials. It promotes the use of wood and other bio-based materials that have a low carbon footprint. At the same time, it urges concrete and steel manufacturers to decarbonize their production. Harnessing embodied carbon in the legislation also promotes the use of reused and recycled materials. Circular economy considers buildings as material banks, as we have heard. Through the new Construction Act of Finland, this principle will be promoted in demolition projects and new buildings. There will also be a national-wide digitalized system to support the reuse and recycling of building materials. Circular principles are being recognized to be a key element in combating climate crisis and sustainable development. In the built environment, it is important to consider the whole life cycle of buildings and keep our buildings and building materials in use as long as possible. When it comes to the planet's triple planetary crisis, climate change, biodiversity loss, and pollution, we are all in the same boat. It is important that the transition towards a circular built environment happens both in the global north as in the global south, and that no one is left behind. Finland recognizes the importance of international cooperation on this matter, and we look forward to a continued fruitful cooperation with UNEP, the GlobalABC, One Planet Network, and other international partners. The building stock changes slowly, and so do construction practices. However, when it comes to planning for the future, there is no time to waste. The impacts of climate change can already be felt across the world. The question is not whether to transition to a circular economy, rather how fast can we do the transition. Thank you very much.